It's great to be back at Games for Change. I may have been here 10 years in a row, maybe. But it's great just to see how things evolve every year. And some of what I like to do is always be looking for where can our field go next. And I feel like one huge area of expansion is around games that are looking at social dynamics and looking at building networks. I, in fact, want to talk about games that are network games in the sense of real-world networks, not just social networks, but networks that take place in the physical world. And that's partly because I think that building networks is an increasingly important 21st century skill, especially as information becomes cheap. What is education about? In some ways, how we form teams, how we connect, how we collaborate is becoming increasingly important. And maybe just turn this to all of you as a poll. How many people came to Games for Change primarily or significantly as a way to meet other people, connect, and possibly collaborate in the future? I would be surprised that that's definitely half, quite likely more. Our schools right now all have alumni networks, and especially high-profile schools really value those alumni networks. And yet, if we look at how education is optimizing its outcomes, it's doing very little to try and achieve good networks. It's kind of like once you graduate, join the alumni network, as if that's the only thing a school has to do. And that's on the school side. On the social change side, of course, collective action is all about the collective. And yet, how many games that you've seen at this conference so far measure the collective? I've seen a lot of games that measure whether an individual has gained knowledge or gained skills, but are we actually measuring the group at all? If we care about collective action, shouldn't we be measuring the collective? If we think networks matter, shouldn't we be measuring the networks? And if we aren't measuring these things, what are the odds that we're building the right games to actually have these kind of outcomes? So that's what I wanted to talk a little bit about. What does a game look like that tries to build network connections and social capital? Well, it's always specific because networks don't exist in general. You're not, other than being a member of the human race, you're all here, you all join particular networks. So I studied a game at USC that I actually think is one of the most innovative games I've seen in a long time. It's called Reality Ends Here, and it's a collaborative production game that tries to get small teams of students working together. It's a card game. So you can see the cards at the left. It begins as a card game, I should say. And this is, if you see the green card, this is a silent short that they're building. This silent short is in a short video that they're making that's about greed involving a love triangle in the SCA courtyard. So you can already get a sense of how this works. It's a collaborative creativity prompt, and the students try and make this silent short involving all those features. These cards came from a bunch of different students. They all contributed, and once they built this structure, they go and they make the creative product. Now, it's not part of a class, just like networks are not assigned. None of you were, well, maybe a few of you were assigned to come to Games for Change, but probably you chose to come here. Civic life also is something that is fundamentally voluntary. And so one of the critical things about this kind of game is that it is a voluntary opt-in game. This game was played for a semester at USC. It was a hidden game. The students were not assigned. In fact, they were never told about it in the class, and many of the administrators denied its existence. Can you imagine this as part of a standard school approach? And yet, this was something that was backed by the administration. So I think it's pretty important that we think about what does it mean to design games that are voluntary in schools where we don't assign them. That to me is a core requirement here. The other part is that it has a physical component. What you're seeing in this other image, these are players with the logo of the game that they've stamped on their arm as part of making a production. A lot of the work happened in dorm rooms. It happened in hallways. It happened with hit cards that were hidden behind. They could be hidden at a stage. You might find one under your seat. I haven't actually hidden any here today. But that's the way that the game was structured. There was all sorts of ways in which the game was hidden and embedded in the physical environment. Now, the network that this game was creating is obviously a network of creative filmmakers, media makers, people who are making games at the USC Cinema School. And the question is, can we connect these students together? Can they be building projects and products together? This is the physical component with the cards and in person, but of course, there's also a digital. So this is the website for the game showing one of the products. And let me see if I can switch to it. There we go. So this is what the website looks like. And what you can see here is they've written a script. So they got this was a project that involved writing a script and then actually making a video about it. I can show you a little bit of the video briefly just to make this concrete.
They said it was just a game. We were supposed to collaborate, become friends. Boy, were they wrong. When Mara formed, with those white sunglasses and black blazers, they ruined everything. The fun turned into a cold-blooded competition for points. In retaliation, a renegade group called the Tribe formed, and those face-painting bohemian assholes took the quality out of it. It was too much. Someone needed to destroy the group system from the inside.
So enough about me. What about you? Why do they call you the master of the game?
It's kind of a long story.
So there are a lot of inside jokes. These are various, I picked this one partly because it's a somewhat meta video about the students as they play their own game, documenting the game, but also making a video about the different team alliances that formed. Let's see if I can get this back here. Oh, actually I did want to show one other thing with the site. If you scroll down further, at the top you can see all the different people that worked on it. And this is public on the public website. So in this way they're sharing their media products with the world. This game was actually talked about a little bit at Games for Change last year. Some of you may have seen it. Jeff Watson designed this as his thesis project for his PhD with Tracy Fullerton, Simon Wiscombe. Fantastic game that more universities are starting to pick up as they think about how do we teach creative production among students. But I'm interested in the network component, and the fact that you can see all the different students that collaborated on it means we have a lot of network data here. We also have one other thing that I think is important to mention for the learning side, which is each project, when you turn it in, you go into a room to say, here's how we used our cards, and you have to record a video justifying how you use different cards. So you can see, this is some of the people who made this game, and they're holding up different cards and explaining how they used them. So those of us that do experiential learning know that reflection part of the cycle is absolutely essential. And the idea that they aren't just making a video and that's done, but they have to then record another video about the making of the video. So every product, even if it's not a video, but they wrote a script, they made a small game, has a reflection video afterward that's then also published and in a public way. So part of what I think is important here is that we're having a kind of metacognition about the fact that we're doing teamwork, collaborative work, and that there are community values then showing up in the game as well. All right, now I'm going to go back. A little switching here. This one. Okay. So what does this look like? So this was in the first year, and I've looked at this now over 2 years, and there's a third year happening this next year. This is what it looks like when you start mapping out the different team projects with the people that did them. So on the far left, you can see one project that was done by one person, and that's the exception. Occasionally, somebody does a one-off just by themselves. But for the most part, projects are done with others. If you look at these, I've done these circles here. These are particularly interesting moments. And I think that this is one of the things about network analysis, for those of you that have done it, I like to think of it as mathematical ethnography. This is a term that Valente has used. Because it's not always about getting a quantitative number that says, did it work, yes or no, here's a p-value, here's our statistical significance. In fact, it's often more about a kind of qualitative analysis that's informed by visualization. So you can see that these two people here were core people that both worked with this group here in a bunch of collaborative projects in the middle. But they also worked on this series of projects here with a bunch of these outliers. So here's a question. What would you advise the teacher to do if they wanted to help build networks at this university? I mean, I think this is a question that administrators should be asking, and one answer is they should take these two students out to lunch and ask them, why did you pull these other folks in? How did you pull them in? How come you're the ones pulling these people in as opposed to this other core of folks? This kind of thing I think good teachers often do intuitively. They can recognize who in the classroom is often grouping different sets of people. But we don't actually ask our games to do this. We don't measure our games in this way, and we also don't give teachers this kind of feedback. Let me show a couple more things that we can do with some of the network stuff. Well, looking at team size over the course of the semester. Initially, we see almost all teams that are about 8 or 10 people. That's a really easy size to make a quick project on. But then there's a funny bump that happens here. Group projects with a team size of about 25 people were also quite common. And what you saw is that alliances started to form. In fact, they wrote semi-legal exclusivity agreements. You can only be part of our team, and you have to make projects with us and not with that other group. And I think a lot of teachers would be like, wait, we can't have that. Everyone has to be able to get along. And, well, it turns out this is actually how the cinema industry works, right? If we're trying to train students to go and work in the real world, forming alliances, working with people you know how to work with, is actually an important set of skills. And reflecting on these practices, both within your own teamwork and once you leave the university, is an important set of skills. How does it grow over time? These are examples of the network, and I looked at the first half of the semester on the left and the second half of the semester on the right. And I have higher res pictures if folks are interested. The way we divided it was not based on time, but based on projects. So there are 92 projects on the left side, and another 92 projects represented on the right. And we can run basic statistics and look. Did the network become more dense from the beginning of the semester to the end of the semester? Turns out it did, and there was a statistically significant difference between the two. It's much more dense in the second half of the semester. Students are starting to collaborate with a broader number of people. The average project has a larger number of people they're collaborating with. Well, this raises some quick questions of what is a healthy network? How many collaborators should we have? And again, this is something that practicing teachers who are having students work in small groups deal with all the time. But when do we give them actual visualizations of this? Let alone, when do we design games that have these kind of metrics in them? I wanted just to talk a little bit about how the school was defining success for this game. Success for them was interdisciplinary production. They really thought that if they were going to be a cutting-edge cinema school in another decade, their students had to be collaborating more than they were right now. They said we're graduating some fantastic students, but our interactive media students are not collaborating as much with the writing students as we wish. They're working with interactive media students. The writing students aren't collaborating with production students. The production students not with the animation students, so on. Well, we can quickly also see that there are some differences by department. Interactive media had the highest participation rate, but the highest per player submission rate was coming from the writing department. At the same time, the highest points on average for a person in a department was coming from I think it was interactive and then production and then animation, a little hard to read from here. But this is intriguing because you can see which department is being strategic in order to win the game. Which department is just getting the most number of people to participate. A good game makes its state information visible, so you can start min-maxing and thinking about how you can win the game by doing better and better. And I'll ask you, how many students in your school know how their department is comparing to other departments? What if you got the writing students to start competing against the animation and digital arts students to say, we would want to have not just higher rates of participation, but higher average point values for our games that we're participating in? Is this a way we should be running schools? I also want to talk about the points. So here are the top 10 point earners. 21,000, 19,000, so on, just ranked by number. A good game that's about networks should have a game mechanic where the points are tied to the network properties that we're interested in. So what does that mean? Well, you'd expect, for instance, that if you're a top point earner, you're doing well in the network as well. Well, we can actually look at this. This is something research can let us do by doing things like analyzing network centrality. However, there are different measures for network centrality. And I'm sharing this because at Games for Change in the past 10 years, I haven't heard any talk about eigenvector centrality, between this centrality, or degree centrality. Those in some ways sound like very academic-y terms, and I'm going to argue to you they shouldn't be that academic-y. We should all be trying to learn a little bit of network science if we think networks are important. If you don't think networks are important and you just want to train one person, fine, don't worry with any of this stuff. But if you care about networks, if you care about collective action, and you care about building social capital among students, we should be able to think about some of the differences. Let me just show you one example. Here's a student, the number 9 student. was ranked 53 in one measure of centrality, but they were ranked number 3 in another measure of centrality. This was a student, just to give a quick explanation of what this means. This second measure of centrality means they actually were a bridger between networks. So this betweenness centrality kind of means there were two cliques and they were joined by this one person. However, they didn't participate in a lot of projects. So they didn't participate in a lot of projects, but when they did, they were a key person that brought two different networks together. I asked, is that something we want our teachers knowing? What if at the mid-semester, teachers didn't just get reports on the grades of their students, but they got measures of their network centrality? They got measures that said, here are where your students are performing in terms of the network and how they're connecting to the alumni network and how they're connecting to each other. Here's an example of how the network analysis can also be used to say where there are groups of students. The network could actually say, these group of students seem to be working together, these don't. Again, giving this kind of information to students might then inform them as they try to make networks. A couple prerequisites quickly as we finish. First, if we shift from games as training to games as reality, rather than, we can get at some of this. And second, rather than individual cognition, to games that are a collective capacity. We're actually building real networks. We're building the alumni network now, rather than waiting until students graduate. So I think it's time to bring games to real world networks, and network analysis can help us do this. All right, thank you. I don't have time for questions, but I'd be glad to talk more about network analysis later.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our next two guests. Their presentation is called Future Bound. Please say hello to Sean Bouchard and Elizabeth Swenson.